My name is Colbert B. Williams Sr. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an Anderson & Anderson certified anger management facilitator. Today's episode we will be talking about anger management. What is anger management? Anger management is gaining and maintaining control of ourselves at a cognitive, emotional, and behavioral level at all times. And many times people come into our sessions and into the intake session thinking that there's a problem with them when they come in for anger management. But anger management, I want to be very clear, is a normal human emotion that is precipitated by a plethora of life experiences, circumstances, values, beliefs, cultural orientations, etc. So when we're seeing anger in a real life situation, understand that that is a secondary emotion. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of grief. Having practiced as a licensed mortician, we see one of these stages of grief quite often, which is anger. And people do not understand that sometimes you can be in a mall, you can be in a parking lot, you can be many different places. When you're observing anger, the question one should ask themselves is, where is that anger coming from? But that's what anger management training is all about. It's a cognitive, behavioral, emotional training that as time goes by, it will become very intuitive and with who you are and what's going on as you interact in your life journeys. I'm going to refer back to the mantra we shared in all of our episodes, which is insight, awareness, and exercising appropriate judgment, meaning maintaining or exercising appropriate choices and decisions. Now, with that insight and awareness in anger management, we are exploring ourselves, looking inwardly at who we are at very in-depth levels. And this is where some of the dynamics of anger management come up. One of them being impulse control. How impulsive are we when we're angered? And again, being able to recognize those particular feelings and thoughts and act upon them in an appropriate manner where hopefully there will be no abuse or no violence involved. And many times I've been asked, well, Colbert, that's not really realistic. Well, again, is it possible to maintain control of ourselves when we're in what they call in the moment or in that zone? And you see this exhibited many times in sports, hockey being one of the most prolific exhibits of anger. Many of the professional sports, football, a lot of your contact sports do have outbursts of anger. And as we explore some more dynamics of anger management, communication, we talk about communication in our curriculum of anger management. Now, communication is one of the key dynamics, if you will, of all interpersonal relationships. So in anger management, as we communicate with one another, it's very, very prevalent of how that relates to, the issue at hand. So communication, there are 4 different styles of communication. The first style is assertive. What is assertive communication? That is a type of communication where you take in consideration the other person's feelings. And it's very open, it's very non-abusive, non-threatening style of communication where you're taking the responsibility to state your needs, your wants, whatever it is that you're trying to express to that other individual, that it's clearly delivered and clearly received. So that's an assertive style of communication. Now the next style is aggressive. Now the aggressive style of communication, many times you will hear voice inflections raised. Many people identify that as the screaming and hollering mode, where people are really going at it with one another. And when we're at that aggressive stage of communication, this is where communication really shuts down. When people are screaming and hollering at one another, it's very difficult actually to be heard, if you will. And many times I will model, issue of having or demonstrate, okay, let's have an argument or a disagreement. And we will talk in this type of tone and people will start laughing and say, well, Colbert, nobody does that when they're angry. Well, therein lies the issue. Now, if we're talking in this manner, we can talk and argue for hours and you can clearly hear me and I can clearly hear you if we're talking at the same level. And this is, again, demonstrates assertive communication versus aggressive. If somebody's really screaming and yelling at you, all communication stops at that point. Now, the next level of next dynamic of communication is passive. Well, what is passive communication? Now, that's the type of communication where a person usually does not express their needs or desires or their feelings, if you will. And you'll observe that a person is observe the eye contact. Usually there's very little eye contact when a person communicates in a passive manner. And also, it's just not being received, or what's the problem? Tell me what's going on, and you're not getting any type of response. And a passive style of communication can also be based upon fear. Now, we've covered fear in probably many of our episodes of the different topics we've talked about. But a passive level of communication can be many times fear-based. Many times it can be based upon one's self-esteem. And so this is part of when you were doing anger management. Sometimes with my discipline, it has a very therapeutic approach, because in that journey, when at the first part of that mantra, the insight, that's the journey of introspection and self-exploration. Who are we? And you will discover in this journey, and this is going to be a journey that you will be on for a lifetime, of absolutely understanding and knowing who you are and who we are. So if I'm a passive type of individual, then this may be something I will need to work on. So if I'm angry, or if there's anger around me, then I know that I need to work on that style of communication that is going to be heard, and also is going to be received and heard. Now, the last style of communication is the passive aggressive. Now, this can be many times very volatile and very dangerous, where you'll see a person, and it ties right into that passive style of communication, where they're not stating their needs and their wants. But with the passive aggressive style of communication, there's an ulterior motive and intent. And this is where it becomes many times very dangerous to most interpersonal relationships, where many times you'll see what we call the sabotage factor. I'm angry at you, and I may have a pleasant voice, but in my mind, something else is going on, that I'm going to get even at some point in time and in some kind of manner. And this is not going to be expressed by you or to the other party. And so at some point in time, that passive aggressive style of communication comes, it's almost like the stab in the back factor, where, wow, where did this come from? I didn't know that you felt that way, or this had this type of effect. But again, it's almost a very reactive style of communication, where a person who's very passive aggressive, this is a style of communication that is clearly not effective, whether we're talking about anger management or any other form of interpersonal relationships. So communication, and again, this is going to be part one. This is going to be anger management in part 1 and 2, and I don't know if I stated that earlier. But however, we'll talk more about the different styles of communication as we go through our other dynamics of anger management. But let's go back to interpersonal relationships. That secondary emotion, where does anger come from? And many times in relationships, we explore, okay, let's talk about your strengths, your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities. And what really makes people angry is really probably not understanding circumstances, situations. Road rage is a classic example of where you'll see communication and impulse control, which is another significant dynamic we talked about earlier, out of control. Around the holidays, now holidays are very stressful times, and we'll talk about that in the following episodes. So again, we'll wrap up for today, and in our next episode, we'll continue on with our part 2 of anger management. So until we meet again, I wish all of you peace, unconditional love, and happiness.
If you are experiencing issues with today's topic and need professional guidance, contact us at 866-726-7881 or through our website, www.enlcinc.com.